Ahoy hoy fellow traveller! I'm glad you are here actually, as I wanted to talk to you about Above the Timberline, a book that straddles the space between graphic novel and art book, using beautifully painted large-scale artworks to create a compelling backdrop for a fantastical adventure, much like those of Simon Stahlenhag, whose works I've spoken about previously. Above the Timberline is artist and author Gregory Manchess's first written work, though they had already forged a successful career as an illustrator and painter, and built a well-established reputation via their book covers and concept artwork. The seeds of the book were sown as part of a documentary about Manchess's creative process, as it was here that they painted the initial image that was to eventually become an entire fictional world. Manchess opens the video saying, "I have a character that is completely made up in my mind and I have no clue about, but I will learn a lot more as I paint." And from there we get to see a glimpse of creative magic. The painting itself, titled Above the Timberline, depicts a young man striding through snow on a mountainside, flanked by a number of seemingly domesticated polar bears, with majestic mountain ranges filling the sky behind them. It is all at once captivating and compelling. I mean, just look at it. It cries out for a wider explanation. Who is this person? Where are they going? What's the deal with these polar bears? Is the eagle with them? What's its name, and why do I think it's meant to be Gary?
What have they done to you, Gary?
It all hints at a world very different from ours, of a different relationship between nature and mankind, as this character, clearly driven by some quest, climbs high into the mountains alone but for their quirky animal companions. Wait, this sounds familiar. Manchess doesn't reveal too much in this video about their wider intention or about the amount of thought behind the initial illustrations that underpin the painting, other than to express that they intended to go on a journey of creation, to try and discover the truth behind this intriguing scene as it was being created. What appeals to me, as someone that finds very different approaches to creativity very interesting, is that philosophically, Gregory Manchess's approach is not to create new worlds, but instead discover them, as if they were revealing a pre-existing reality rather than constructing one anew. That sense of raw creative magic, that artistic romanticism, is what imbues such work with life, and that creates depth beyond mere strokes of oil paint on canvas. As little-known Italian sculptor Michelangelo is credited with saying, "The sculpture is already complete within the marble block before I start my work. It is already there, I just have to chisel away the superfluous material." The magic of creation is something that is impossible to quantify, and Gregory Manchess's work contains a vitality and, not wanting to sound too wanky, but a kind of internal truth that no dead-eyed AI-generated creation can replicate. Anyway, I can no longer feel my toes, so let's move on to what comes next. In this video, we will take a look at this world that Gregory Manchess created from that singular moment of inspiration, by exploring the setting, the characters, the main plot beats, and finally the themes that spoke to me as I made my way through the book. Like with my Simon Stahlenhag series, I have deliberately avoided reading or watching any analysis, interviews, or supporting media, and am instead trying to provide my own thoughts uncoloured by other people's views of Above the Timberline. Some of what I discuss will likely differ from the authorial intent and will be coloured by my own taste and biases. But that is the fun thing about art. It is subjective, and we will all take something different away from it. And I would be interested to hear your thoughts on it in the comments. Now then, it is time to don your snow boots, fire up your steam engine, and get ready for a trip into the tundra as we head above the timberline. I, however, am heading inside and trying to thaw remains of my lower extremities. That's better, isn't it? It's so much easier to read an autocue when your eyelids aren't frozen together. What's that? Oh yes, the book. Above the Timberline is set on this planet, 1500 years in the future and after the fall of civilization as we know it. Yep, technically this is a post-apocalypse book, and in this setting, the apocalypse happened, well, about now. The world has endured 15 centuries of ice age, and humanity has had to adapt to this new environment whilst also losing much of the knowledge, culture and technology from the world before. That being said, they did seem to keep some things from the old world, mostly capitalism, imperialism and toxic masculinity, but more on that later. Now, It is important to state that this is a graphic novel, a narrative told to us from the viewpoints of a few key characters, and it is not an encyclopedia or a Silmarillion, so it does not tell you the exhaustive history or geography of this world. Like the characters you will be following, you have to piece together bits of information and draw conclusions yourself. We do discover that some archaeologists discovered evidence of global warming in this time, and one of our characters hypothesizes that the ozone layer was completely destroyed and that the CO2 escaped our atmosphere, leaving us suddenly in a much colder environment. This then led to a pole shift, and the equator effectively switched from north and south to east and west. As a result, the Earth's tectonic plates began to move erratically and violently, smashing whole continents together, burying cities, and basically the whole planet started to smash against itself and throw humanity into disarray. Add 1500 years of snow, and all of a sudden we're looking at above the Timberline. Civilization has splintered into something more akin to city-states or regional empires, of which we only see a small piece, the parts that directly affect our story. We encounter three main cultures throughout the book that illustrate how mankind has changed since the world has frozen over. Firstly, there are the nomadic peoples, like the Tuklan, who have adapted to survive in the ice and snow of the tundran wilds. They live in small mobile tribes that will trade with others, but otherwise largely keep to themselves in the harsher environments, and away from the more prescriptive types of civilization. Then there are the religious peoples, like those of the Shadow Moon Monastery, that have built a new spiritual culture based on life in the Ice Age, reshaping old traditions through the lens of a changed world. They view the dominance of the polar bear as indicative of the kind of virtues that are preferable in a world that was judged and found wanting, and are slow to trust the intent of outsiders. Finally, there are the nostalgic peoples of the cities that cling to the artifacts and traditions of the previous world, relying on a class-based system complete with hereditary wealth, capitalism, imperialism, and all of the dressings of 19th century Britain, right down to the actual clothes. Most of our understanding of the nostalgic peoples comes via what we see of the Polaris Geographic Society, a very conservative colonial organisation that is preoccupied with accumulating wealth and prestige. Whilst the tech of this setting is largely a throwback to the age of steam, amusingly some of it is somewhat more advanced than that of our own steam period, featuring an interesting vision of what a slightly more modernised version of steam tech could look like. Hence, the hat. Likewise, most of the firearms we see are pneumatic air rifles, so they eject a musket-like plume of hot air when they fire, adding a dynamism and energy that a traditional firearm might be missing when captured in a still image. A lot of the uniforms and costuming present throughout the book feel very much embedded in late 19th, early 20th century Britain and Europe, complete with leather pilot hats, tailed jackets and knee-high boots. Oh, and high-altitude diving helmet boarding forces, of course. There is a First World War vibe that permeates much of the city-based portions of the book, supported by the proliferation of airships, steam trains, and old-fashioned planes that we experience early on. And war, it seems, also survived the end of the world, with numerous mentions of a war in recent history and multiple references to our young protagonist having trained as a pilot at a military academy. We don't get to find out the scope or nature of these past conflicts or the current state of the wider geopolitics, but we can gather that one of the main incentives for the exploration of remote locations is in hope of discovering weapons from the time before. Weapons that could allow the discoverer to reverse engineer and then utilise the forgotten power of a more devastating time. That seems like a healthy obsession for a world still enjoying the aftermath of the last apocalypse. Speaking of which, the rampant capitalism present in the cities we encounter has forced the different archetypal culture groups into conflict, as the need to expand further and further in search of growth takes the capitalists out into lands occupied by the more religious and nomadic peoples of the world. Our lens for understanding the behaviour and motivations of the city-based nostalgic cultures is via the Polaris Geographic Society, or PGS. The PGS is made up seemingly of only older rich white guys who sit around in what looks like an old gentleman's club, drinking brandy and being passive-aggressive at each other. As a British person, I am familiar with this aesthetic, as this is what we normally call the Houses of Parliament. Now then, The PGS and its collection of gout-riddled moustache wearers fund individual expeditions that go out into the tundra to discover things, and to recover technology and artifacts from the old world for trade, and as mentioned before, reverse engineering. You may have noticed that I used quotation marks on the word discover there. That's because it's a lie. Much like the British Empire of the past, from which they borrow heavily, the PGS considers anything they don't currently own to be the wild, uncivilized unknown, just waiting for a flag to be planted there. I mean, they literally refer to the lands beyond their borders as the Waste. However, there are in fact quite a large number of people living in the Waste already. People that have already discovered many things that the PGS are unaware of. People that are also often referred to in the book as natives, which is an interesting choice of word, isn't it? Yes, the PGS are basically good old-fashioned colonials wearing those dreadful beige pith helmets as they stomp around the wastes looking to discover, and more importantly, own anything of value that they can find. Turns out that much like our world, adopting capitalism as your preferred method of goods and wealth distribution will inevitably lead to both colonialism and, imperialism. The Polaris Geographic Society and the wider culture that they sprang from would appear to be on much the same path as an early 20th century Britain. A heavily hierarchical class system that is exploiting its own working classes and of course other cultures in order to feed the hungry hippo of capitalism. Speaking of hippos, it's probably worth mentioning that, interestingly, whilst all this has been happening, the wildlife of the planet has also been adapting, and we now have smarter polar bears that understand sign language, herds of larger and more aggressive snow leopards that like how humans taste, and possibly my favourite addition, great big furry rhinos. So hey, we might have the horrors of colonialism, capitalism and war, but we do have a bunch of cuddly snow rhinos, so it's swings and roundabouts. Let's take stock then, shall we? In this book, we have a view of a small slice of an icy world, filled with death-dealing monster animals, and three distinct and competing human cultures, each seeking to protect their own version of civilization as they move around on the corpse of a richer, but entirely doomed historical civilization. To be clear, that would be our entirely doomed historical civilization. But that's enough talk of the world. Let's move on to talking about the characters we encounter on our journey through the Waste and beyond. Please bear in mind that from this point forward there will be spoilers for pretty much all elements of the book. Wesley Singleton, young, rich fail son and cringe protagonist. First up is our protagonist, a young academy pilot and rich boy fail son named Wesley Singleton. Part of a wealthy family, Wes is a good mummy's boy who has a somewhat strained relationship with their mostly absent and aloof father, the esteemed explorer Galen Singleton. You may have noticed that I didn't mention Wes's mother's name there. This was a deliberate choice, seeing as the book doesn't bother telling us until about 90% through the whole story. And there is a thread here that we'll be pulling a bit later on, but not yet. It's Elizabeth, by the way. Now, as our protagonist, most of the book is presented via Wes's journals or conversations, and as you might expect from a privileged 17-year-old raised in a military-focused colonial state, they are pretty naive about much of the world beyond the four walls of their home. And as a result, they are strong in the ways of cringe. Seriously though, I haven't decided yet whether Wes's dialogue is masterfully written as a cutting representation of both the aforementioned naivety and teenage awkwardness, or is just a clumsy but genuine attempt at cool dialogue by a middle-aged man writing teen speak. Wes Singleton is a good-natured soul, though their lack of self-reflection and ignorance of their own privilege often brings them into conflict when they encounter people from beyond their sphere of understanding. They do mean well, and to be fair, they do learn and grow over the course of the story, but unfortunately a large part of their journey is falling prey to manipulations, both at home and beyond. Galen Singleton, obsessive rich dude, good explorer, shitty dad. Galen is a bit of a dick. Not the worst we will encounter, but still not a great guy. As a sort of secondary protagonist, we explore Galen's character largely via their journal entries as Wes reads them, and this provides us with an unfiltered view of what matters to Galen. And I mean, they basically don't care about their family until they realise they may never see them again. As the poster boy for colonial explorers everywhere, Galen spends almost every moment of every day thinking about legends of a lost city in the old world, and wandering out into the snow using their family's wealth, along with that of the totally not problematic Polaris Geographic Society. Now, whilst Galen is slightly less racist than their peers, and often works with what the PGS call natives, it is mostly done with the purpose of gaining access to knowledge that will give them an edge, and to be the one that gets to exploit resources and win favour with their colleagues. Galen builds relationships with the Tuklan, which allows them to discover things that the other members of the PGS cannot, and although at first glance this sounds like a good thing, this makes Galen about as popular as Prince Andrew's search history among their colleagues, since something competition, prestige, free market. Galen's relentless and obsessive drive to discover the mythic shrouded city at any cost effectively makes them a lousy dad and a worse husband, and this is important to bear in mind as we travel through this video. Galen is presented as a problematic but honourable Indiana Jones, but they are probably closer to Indiana Jones's dad from The Last Crusade, since they also neglected their child in order to pursue their life's work.
Did I ever tell you to eat up, go to bed, wash your ears, do your homework? No, I respected your privacy, and I taught you self-reliance.
What you taught me was that I was less important to you than people who'd been dead for 500 years in another country, and I learned it so well that we've hardly spoken for 20 years.
You left just when you were becoming interesting.
Hopefully that is where the similarities end.
You think it's good to slap a woman?
No, I don't think it's good. I
think it's bad.
I don't think it's that bad. I think that it depends entirely on the circumstances and if it merits it.
Wait till people see this interview. You're going to get mail.
Might get some female.
Elizabeth Singleton. Wife, mother, voice on the phone. Ah, poor Elizabeth. I think if I say their name one more time, I will have acknowledged Elizabeth beyond their role as wife or mother more times than the book does. Sweet Liz's main role in the book is to be abandoned by the men in her life, who go off to chase myths in a freezing deathscape full of blizzards, bears and bastards. This unfortunate woman is abandoned, neglected and eventually used as a hostage by bad guys, and in this time is given little characterization or agency, acting merely as a plot device and a sort of angelic contrast point for the dysfunction of Wes and Galen. No time is spent acknowledging that she is managing the household, coordinating Galen's expedition comms and raising Wes, and there is no prestige, riches or rewards for doing so. Braeburn Wilkes. Darth Vader in Jodhpurs. Braeburn Wilkes is another rich white guy, there's quite a few of these, and like Galen is a member of the Polaris Geographic Society, funding and organising expeditions into the White Unknown in search of valuable artefacts of the world from before. Most importantly, they are a big old scumbag, sky pirate and apple-named weasel that I wouldn't trust with my change from a round at the pub. Wilkes was once a friend of Galen's. As you know, rich guys sipping brandy and leather armchairs is the done thing in the PGS, but eventually jealousy and a thirst for power led to betrayal. Though of course, as they are both capitalists and free marketers, they both seemingly accept this state of uneasy hostility as the nature of competition. It is a bit of an understatement to say that Wilkes is not a good person, and ends up being our main antagonist in what might be generously referred to as a twist, despite the near constant moustache twiddling performed in each scene that they appear in. To give them their dues, their final appearance on a heavily armed airship flanked by soldiers with those deep-sea diver suits and pneumatic rifles, Braeburn Wilkes has the chops of a proper baddie, and the book is better for having them in it. Samson Barstow. Captain Birdseye's problematic brother. Samson Barstow is another member of the Polaris Geographic Society, though one of lower station than Galen or Wilkes, tending to be more of a middleman or minion in the games of much bigger fish. And I use that particular phrase since, much like their resemblance to Captain Birdseye, there is definitely something fishy about Mr. Barstow. Barstow has worked with Galen on previous expeditions, but Wes in particular is very mistrustful of them, remembering of an instance where Barstow failed to share Galen's portion of the findings, though I don't think it is ever revealed what Galen makes of this situation. The wealth of the Singleton family was evidently enough that this money wasn't missed, or at least not sufficiently that they pursued it to any degree. It is a sign that Barstow is an opportunist, and someone that is prepared to prioritise personal gain over any quaint sense of honour or camaraderie, though someone making a living from robbing rich folks that are too busy exploiting others to notice, I'm here for it. Seriously though, he is a 100% slippery bastard and would definitely dress like Santa in order to rob kids at Christmas. Linnea, part sage, part love interest. Linnea is originally from the Tuklan tribe, but has also lived at the Shadow Moon Monastery, and as a result is both spiritually aware, practically capable, and yet still a teenage love interest when needed, like a sort of Swiss Army knife of a character, though they do at least get the good grace of being named fairly early. Sorry, Elizabeth. Linnea's agency is an interesting subject, given that they are involved in most of the big set pieces throughout the book, but not always by choice. They are the daughter of Solon Kai, a nomadic Tuklan warlord, and so is the subject of a proposed political marriage between the Tuklan and the Shadow Moon Monastery, and is used as the vessel by which much of the spiritual lore of the book is translated for wide-eyed Wes, and by extension, of course, the reader. To their credit, however, Linnea is self-aware enough to avoid the trappings of being used as the noble savage, an overly simplified Western theory described on Wikipedia thusly. The noble savage symbolised the innate goodness and moral superiority of a primitive people living in harmony with nature. Linnea resents being expected to provide spiritual guidance to rich city boys, and calls Wes out on this a couple of times. Being equal parts warrior, love interest, fiercely independent woman, and pastiche of the aforementioned noble savage trope leaves little room for nuance, and Linnea ends up a likeable but mostly functional foil for Wes to be a clumsy, awkward teen around. Solon Kai, nomad, warlord, also a shitty dad. Solon Kai is the chieftain of the Tuklan, the largest tribe of nomads in what the Polaris Geographical Society and their ilk have lovingly dubbed the Waste. Solon Kai is something of a complicated fellow with several contradictions in their demeanour and behaviour throughout the book, so let's look at a few different facets of their character and try to understand what we know. The first mentions of Solon Kai are in Galen's journal and describe how Solon Kai was generous and patient when first encountering Galen's expedition. Not only is Solon Kai trusting and inquisitive, they quickly offer to assist their explorations despite not being offered anything in return, which is naturally puzzling to a wealthy capitalist like Galen. Tribal Chief Solon Kai has promised to show me the barrier wall and the path they've used to cross for years. Oddly, he wants no payment. This barrier wall is essentially what separates the more easily accessible parts of the Waste from the areas which have all of the artifacts and treasures buried in them. However, the rich white folk have basically all failed to find a way past the barrier wall thus far, and Galen correctly reasons that the people living in the lands around the wall probably know something the PGS does not. Galen also notes in their journal that Solon Kai was not only willing to share this information, but was in fact enthusiastic to show it to him. But in the time between Galen's initial exchanges and when Wes encounters the tribal leader in search of his father, something has changed in Solon Kai's demeanour. Gone is the friendly, open Solon Kai of the past. Instead, they are abrupt, dismissive, and preoccupied with uniting the nomadic tribes under the Tuklan banner, using weapons bought from Apple Badman Braben Wilkes. So, was Solon Kai ever really a generous and inquisitive soul? Or were they always perhaps playing a long game with an agenda all of their own? It's difficult to know, given that we have no real insight into Solon Kai's thought process, but certainly they appear anything but generous and patient with Wes. Consider next the fact that Solon Kai is Linnea's father, and was seemingly willing to use her in a political marriage arranged with the Shadow Moon Monastery in what was a blatant attempt to consolidate power with the only other significant civilization we encounter in the Wastes. This cold strategizing and the willingness to sacrifice their own daughter's agency definitely falls more into the scary warlord view of Solon Kai, as opposed to the friendly nomad who was enthusiastic to help Galen early on. Again, we don't know whether Solon Kai was a devious strategist all along, planning for domination from the start, or merely an opportunist willing to be ruthless when presented with the right opening. There are certainly moments that humanise them, moments of warmth with their daughter, or where they drop their guard just a little and let us see the insecurities and vulnerabilities underneath the hard pretense that they have developed. But I still don't know how I feel about them overall. Finally, just to add another layer to our understanding of Sol and Kai, we learn that their former wife, Dessa, left them to live with Tao, who we are covering next. Is all of this behaviour because their wife left them? Or did Dessa leave because of this behaviour? We will never know. But it sure makes Sol and Kai an intriguing and challenging character to categorise. Tao, stern, aloof, and definitely not a blue alien from 40k. Tao is the leader of the Shadow Moon Monastery and the accompanying village, which is the only fixed area of civilization that we really encounter in the Waste. Now, we don't get much time with Tao really, so to understand their character some more, we should probably talk a little about what the monastery believes and examine some key interactions that Tao has with others. The monks of the Shadow Moon Monastery worship the Old Man, a spiritual entity that they believe watches over and influences the tundra, and has a strong connection to the bears they share the tundra with. As a result of the cultural relationship with bears, their architecture and iconography is absolutely riddled with bear motifs, regularly using the constellation of the bear as a decorative and contemplative symbol. The locals have even developed a language of hand signals that allow them to communicate with the big fluffy kill machines that frequent the nearby area. This same effort does not appear to have gone into their relationships with the rhinos or snow leopards, which I think is a shame. But then I don't have to avoid being mauled or trampled by them when walking to Morrison's, so maybe I'm not best placed to judge. We've already mentioned that Sol and Kai's ex-wife Dessa left Sol and Kai to be with Tao, and that Sol and Kai then sent their daughter Linnea to be married to a monk at the monastery. That monk was Xuan, who is the right-hand man to Tao. It is not really discussed what state the marriage arrangement is in at the time we encounter Linnea, but it certainly doesn't feel like Tao would enforce it should Linnea decide that they did not want to marry Xuan. In a journal entry, Linnea remarks, "Xuan has asked me so many times to bind our hearts, and I wonder when we will." This would suggest Tao has given Linnea more agency than her father, and this is further shown by Tao's exchange with Sol and Kai about Dessa. "She left of her own volition, Sol and Kai. She wanted no part of you. You took advantage of her, she would have come back to me. Like all the other times, she wanted her freedom. You gave her nothing, I gave her a daughter, and I raised that daughter as my own." Make no mistake though, Tao is ruthless and zealous in their faith, and this can make them a very dangerous encounter, as young Wes discovers when Tao puts them through a trial by sword to judge whether their god, the Old Man, deems Wes worthy of saving. Luckily, Wes is able to avoid the unseen swing of the sword thanks to their awareness training during their time training as a military pilot, and it's best not to think about that aspect too much. Once they've been accepted by Tao and their friendly neighbourhood bears, Tao does soften a fair bit and starts to assign prophetic meaning to Wes, though probably as a coping mechanism for Wes having survived their rituals. A useful ally and a dangerous enemy, Tao is the figurehead of the religion of the Ice Age, and stands as a reminder that religious zeal can be a powerful motivator. Now, there are a few other characters we encounter throughout above the Timberline, but we have covered off the ones essential for us to now go through a rapid-fire version of the plot. So wax your skis, strap yourself in, we are going into the Waste. Okay, so this is going to be a lightning-fast rundown of the main plot beats. It is by no means exhaustive, but if you want to know more, go get the book. There were quite a few floating around on eBay when I last looked, and they were not too expensive. So we start off our story with explorer Galen Singleton on a big survey airship looking for a legendary Shrouded City, a place rumoured to have all kinds of impressive doohickeys and gizmos, when all of a sudden, boom! The airship comes under attack from another airship. See, I think more people would be open to steampunk if there was a bit more airship combat and a bit less guys with top hats at gigs standing in the way and poking my friend in the eye with the feather coming off of their hat. True story. It was a Gary Newman gig too, so it seemed a bit disrespectful to wear steampunk gear when Newman famously prefers their friends electric. Anyway, Galen's airship is rocked by inter-airship gunfire, which again is awesome. We meet Galen's colleague, loathsome coward Thomason Edwards, who immediately suggests they should surrender and discuss terms. He becomes quite upset when Galen reveals that they didn't bring a one-of-the-kind artifact with them. This is because Edwards is a turncoat and has sold Galen out to a rival explorer on the understanding that said artifact would be on board. This is important as the artifact is believed to be linked to the aforementioned Shrouded City. The Polaris Geographic Society, to which they both belong, is basically a bunch of rich white guys trying to fuck each other over for profit and clout, so you get the impression that this is not the most surprising event. Galen's airship captain attempts a barrel roll and it looks awesome, but ultimately achieves very little, and consequently a battle breaks out on the airship. They are boarded by these high-altitude diving suit soldiers and many crew members die in what is an exciting firefight, whilst the wealthy explorers slink off to escape. Seriously though, Steampunk, more of this stuff. Whilst the working class staff are using their dying bodies to slow up the attackers, Galen jumps into a small biplane and pulls the get out of dodge lever before they can be shot or captured, though their plane does catch some bullets and begins to descend at a speed somewhat faster than comfortable. Back at the Singleton residence, a message finds its way to Galen's wife and son, Elizabeth and Wesley. It reads, "Airship down, rations low, nowhere, Singleton." Now, we switch to the perspective of young Wesley Singleton, 17-year-old academy pilot and rich boy who resents their dad but also wants that sweet recognition from their explorer father. This is largely because of the disappointment and disregard they associate with previous interactions with Galen, and as a result, although Wes naturally wants to rescue their dad, there is also a big old slice of "I'll show you" about the whole situation. Look him up, you get world-class explorer for the Polaris Geographic Society. Discoverer of the Great Plateau. They should have added absentee father searches for lost treasures under the ice. Had he searched close enough, he might have discovered he had a family. Wes leaves the pilot academy and heads to the Polaris Geographic Society, assuming that they would be keen to arrange a rescue attempt for Galen, the PGS's most famous explorer. Instead, Wes quickly learns that Galen's success has made them something of a pariah to the others, a standard that they can't compare to, and that some of them would prefer to see Galen remain lost. The PGS declines to mount a rescue, reasoning that they don't want to lose more people to save just one, and on the way out, Wes encounters an old colleague of their father's in the social area of the PGS, a certain Braben Wilkes. Wilkes explains rather bluntly that Galen's prestige and success has made them a pariah as much as a champion. Look around you, son. These guys would just as soon see your old man wiped off the map, erase his reputation. After seeing that Wesley was determined to go regardless of any backing, Wilkes makes them a proposal of their own, suggesting that they would help fund the rescue attempt so long as they got ownership of anything that Galen has found whilst on their expedition. Now, Wesley is naive, sure, but they're also aware that the men in this room are not to be trusted, having already referred to them internally as snakes. Wes accepts Wilkes' terms, reasoning that if they find Galen, it would be a fair trade for them to keep the returns of the Shrouded City Galen was searching for. This guy might want the glory and give me what I need for the rescue, but if I find father, I've lived up to my part of the agreement. He can have the rest. Wes then heads home to discover that there has been a break-in and that their mother Elizabeth was assaulted by ne'er-do-wells that ransacked their chart room looking for something. Just in case you were in any doubt as to the wealth of our protagonists, they have a room just for their charts. If someone came to ransack my flat, they would likely be crushed upon opening the one proper cupboard we stuff all of our things into. But I digress. Now, as mentioned previously, Elizabeth, Wes's mother, is treated somewhat dismissively in the book. Their name isn't revealed until much later, and look, I like dogs, but check out this exchange and you tell me who is given more attention and sympathy. Mother, what happened? You alright? I don't... Who did this? Masked, didn't see them. Where's Max? They discover that their faithful hound Max, who is named immediately by the way, bit the intruder and was beaten as a result. And Wes has this thought: nobody beats a man's mother, you beat his dog and you've doubled down. Now look, I'm a dog person. I like dogs, but it feels like a strange sentence to throw in given the circumstances. Whilst I enjoy the John Wick vibes of not the dog, it does feel a bit like it is reducing the relative importance of their mother, who, again, the book hasn't named yet. And Wes's sympathy for her lasts as long as it takes to notice the dog isn't around. The next day, Wes explains the rescue situation to Elizabeth, who visibly bristles when Braben Wilkes is mentioned. Elizabeth warns Wesley that they are not to be trusted, proving that Liz here is a better judge of character than both Galen and Wes, and they are also quick to point out that this sentiment is extended to all that embrace the PGS's approach to life. These men, they don't play by the rules, Wes. For that matter, neither did your father. Elizabeth then reveals a hidden compartment in a bookshelf and retrieves the ancient artifact everyone was after in the airship assault. She tells Wes that it was this item that the intruders were likely searching for, and that if Galen had indeed found the Shrouded City, that they would need this, as they are in some way related. We then fast forward to 2 days' time, and Wes is boarding an airship headed to Crescent City, where they then catch a Snowpiercer-looking train, tellingly called the Empire Flyer, which takes them all the way to the edge of what they consider civilization, a miner's outpost called Darsum. Upon arriving, Wes goes to inspect their snowmobile, provided as it was by Braben Wilkes, and discovers that evil Captain Birdseye Sam Barstow is also on the train, and appears to have a wounded leg. I glanced at Sam's pant leg, ripped hole with a bandage underneath. Looks like that must have hurt. Huh? Oh, I fell on some steps. Nasty cut. Looked more like a nasty bite to me. So yeah, Sam Barstow was clearly the man who broke into the Singleton house, assaulted Elizabeth, and booted the dog. Clearly, he's not a good guy. Shocking, right? We also meet one of my favourite characters, who sadly isn't in the book very long, and so didn't get a mention in the character section. This is Struts. They are a mechanic, and very clearly treated as being of a different class by the other characters, and the author, so they don't get a full name. They are almost unique amongst the many characters we encounter in the book, as they do not try to trick, intimidate, con, or manipulate Wesley, but instead are shocked and appalled at the idea of a 17-year-old going out on their own into a dangerous territory. Sam, for heat's sakes, we can't be sending a kid out there. What's the matter with you? However, once they realise that they are unable to convince Wes to stop, they instead spend their time trying to prepare them as much as possible. Oh, pitch, if he's going, he's going. Come over here, young fella. Some things I've got to show you to keep your assets from getting killed. Yep, Struts has an accent and everything, because again, working class. On the morning that Wes is to set off, Struts again feels it important to share some advice for survival in the waste. You got spike ice, spinners and snow dogs. Strange things happen out there, you know what I mean? It messes with your head. Keep your mow up, camp clean. Where there's garbage, there's rhinos. Rhino won't bother me. Yeah, but where there's rhinos, there's ghost cats. Oh, serious as a heart attack, son. You gotta watch out for them. Will you, Wes? It's genuinely heartwarming that for a short time you have this positive male role model who seemingly has Wes's best interests at heart. And all of this is despite the fact that Struts is literally surrounded by rich guys living recklessly and exploiting everyone around them. Struts is good people is what I'm saying, because it would have been very easy for them to resent Wes for being just another rich kid who is given top of the line equipment that most could never attain. Anyway, Struts gives the precocious rich kid the keys to a Bentley looking snowmobile type thing, and off he goes into the waste. As Wesley heads off, we cut to Barstow calling someone on the phone and advising that Wes has just left, basically confirming that Barstow is a baddie, though if you haven't gathered that by this stage, I have a bridge to sell you. After a few days of making decent progress, Wes reminds you that they're a teenager by getting overconfident, driving too fast and nearly crashing into a rhino, which in turn spooks a whole herd of rhino that then comedically crash into the snowmobile, totaling the whole thing and leaving Wes stranded in the tundra. To their credit, Wes then builds an engine-powered sled out of the surviving components of the snowmobile and continues on into the waste, only stopping to relay their position to Wilkes and then Elizabeth via different channels on the wireless radio. It is around this part of the story we start seeing bulked up snow leopards tracking Wes from a distance. Now these are not your kind, friendly, zoo-looking snow leopards of the world. These are ghost cats that are closer to saber-toothed tigers and that are adept pack hunters. And now they are hunting Wesley. Young Wesley eventually finds the passage through the barrier, a massive unscalable ice wall, using Stahlenkai's directions from Galen's journal, and narrowly avoids being caught in an avalanche of their own causing after their engine backfires whilst in a narrow passage between the snowbanks. When Wes goes to report their position to Elizabeth on the radio, Braben Wilkes answers, revealing that they know Wes has been reporting false coordinates and that they are holding Elizabeth hostage to ensure that Wes will follow through on their part of the deal. My associates will stay here and make certain no harm comes to your lovely mother, unless you send me inaccurate information. You copy? So now the cards are revealed. We know that Wilkes is the main baddie, and that they have been using Barstow as a hired goon to help them to try and steal Galen's artifact and to claim the Shrouded City and its contents for themselves. Wes destroys the radio in a rage and continues on in their sled, using their 2 messenger birds to maintain communications with their mother, and by extension Wilkes too. Before long, they encounter some nomadic tribesmen led by Stahlenhag. 25 cutters, or sail-based snow sleds for us city folk, quickly surround Wes, and a warning shot is glanced off of Wes's snow sled to let them know that this is not going to be at all similar to Galen's first meeting with Stahlenhag. Something has changed in the Tuckland chieftain since that first meeting, and not for the better. Stahlenhag signals to their troops, and they fully surround Wes's sled, whilst Stahlenhag questions Wes, and is particularly curious about why the young pilot is carrying a rifle. When Wes answers that it is for hunting game, Stahlenhag admonishes them, not showing the same generosity that they paid to Galen in the past. This game you hunt, that would be Tuckland game, Singleton, and that comes at a price. I understand. May I offer something for trade? Stahlenhag pulled the Wimslow from the mount, stared back at me, and held my gaze. The weak man finds strength in weaponry. I think you are but a boy. Wes is captured and is taken back to the camp for more questions, which goes about as well as you would expect, with Wes tripping over their words and confusing matters by trying to lie about their true mission. Wesley claims that they are seeking the Shrouded City, before eventually revealing that they're really looking for their father. After growing frustrated with the aggressive and unhelpful demeanour of the Tuckland, Wes ends up in a heated confrontation with a tribesman called Mock, who ridicules Wes before striking them to the ground. You and all your machines descend on our pure land, and for what? I'll tell you why. To plunder it. Tell us, why would such a city be of value to you and not have more value to us? Mock spit in fire there, and to be honest, where is the lie? They do strike a child though, so let's not deify them just yet. The Tuckland lock Wes up in a leather tent and then talk openly of ransoming them, since it would appear that Stahlenhag, like Barstow, is in the employ of Wilkes. That very night, however, Wes is able to escape their tent using a hidden knife, and finds a tribesperson ransacking their sled. They sneak up and attack the thief with a mind to regaining their stuff before making good their escape, but despite having the element of surprise, Wes gets their arse served back to them hilariously quickly. This tribesperson, as it turns out, is Linnea, daughter of Stahlenhag, and somewhat fortuitously, they also had plans on escaping the camp, and agreed to take Wes along. Linnea quickly takes charge, sabotaging the sails of the Tuckland cutters to make pursuit impossible, and then piloting their own cutter out of the camp. After they have left, Braben Wilkes arrives at the Tuckland camp using what is described as a stealth airship. Very cool, and admonishes Stahlenhag for their failure to contain the boy as requested. Wilkes stared at him, his voice pitch dropped. I need the device, and I need to know where he's headed with it. I remind you I'm paying you handsomely, or perhaps we should re-evaluate our agreement. Wes and Linnea's cutter was damaged in the escape, and as a result they end up having to trudge the rest of the way on foot, which is not only slower, but also allows some old friends to catch up with them. Wes manages to shoot one, but they are quickly set upon, with Wes and Linnea using their large knives to try and fend off the dangerous cats until the local neighbourhood polar bears fight off the cats, who by this point have badly wounded Linnea and Wes, and through gestures and body language they communicate to Wes that Linnea needs help, and that they are to travel together. Wes is terrified and extremely mistrustful of their furry saviours, but acquiesces, and so they travel for a couple of days before arriving at the Shadow Moon Monastery. There, Wes meets Tao, a stern monk leader who questions them in a way very similar to Solon Kai, suspiciously probing the stuttered answers from the young pilot, searching for some ulterior motive to Wes's search for their father. Perhaps he wants to be out here, Mr. Singleton, since he is on expedition. Yes, he does want to be out here. He's searching for something but got lost, so I came out, and now you are lost too. Yes, but I think I know where he is, so he is not lost. Oh, he's lost, but I mean, neither of you seem very good at this searching. Tao essentially tells Wes that he is to stay with them whilst they decide what to do about all of this, and in the meantime Wes gets to know Linnea better, who has recovered somewhat from their injuries and are decidedly more friendly and relaxed now they are somewhere they consider a safe space. We get a little insight into Linnea's character via short journal entries of their own, which basically confirm that the awkward teen flirting is very much mutual, and that they find Wes amusing and intriguing like a sort of clumsy puppy, which feels about right, to be honest. Tao comes again to Wes a few days later holding Galen's artifact and inquires as to why Wes is carrying such an item. I wonder why a young man of your age is out here far beyond his home carrying this ancient mechanism that does nothing to help feed a man or even find a man. That's his, and I was hoping to bring it to him. This is not his. This belongs to no one. This is an artifact of the world and only those who fulfill the prophecy can possess it. Then it's yours. If it'll get me home any faster, keep it. Wes manages to offend and insult Tao without really getting any more info, which is a fairly consistent feature of Wes's interactions with others, with the possible exception of Linnea, who kind of digs his awkwardness. Wes is eventually dragged off to face a sort of ritualistic trial by sword and bear, in order to prove that they are favoured by the monk's chosen deity, and thus are both not a threat to the monastery, and are worthy to carry the artifact. Wes is somewhat fortuitously able to avoid the unseen downward strike of the ritualist's sword, and is then judged by the polar bears to be worthy of friendship with the monastery, effectively proving to the monks that they are a decent chap. All of this is framed by the monastery's belief in the Old Man, a wintry and spiritual god figure that watches over those in the tundra, the theory being that if Wes was in any way false or had evil intent, they would have been struck down by the sword or mauled by the bears. After this, Tao begins to tolerate Wes's clumsiness and naivety a little bit more, and reveals a huge planetarium-style 3D dimensional star chart explaining that the monks have also searched for the Shrouded City in the past. Tao remains skeptical about the existence of the actual city, but sympathises with Wes's motivations and commitment to searching for their father, having also lost their own father to a similar expedition in search of the same mythical city. If I remember anything at all about being so very young, it is that no one could tell me anything I did not already know. Gesturing to the focal point of the huge star chart, Tao reveals that it is pointed at a star on the nose of the Ursa Major constellation, a star called Arcturus, and that this is also the Shrouded City's rumoured name. I do not know how you came by this device, but I believe there is some reason you are here, Wesley. We only reveal this name to those we trust. Tao reveals the suspected location of the Shrouded City to Wes, at the same time that Braeburn Wilkes and Solon Kai arrive to confront the monastery, having tracked Wes and Linnea to their door. Tao quickly ushers Wes and Linnea out of the monastery via a tunnel underneath, before meeting Solon Kai and some of Wilkes' diver troops on the walls of their city, beautifully illustrated by this amazing image. Solon Kai demands to know where Wesley is, but interestingly doesn't ask about Linnea at all. Tao tells them to do one, and concedes that Wes was there at one point, but left ages ago. Solon Kai doesn't take this well, and starts ranting about his ex-wife leaving them for Tao, and the two square off seconds from war. With a word, I could burn this place to cinders, gesturing to Wilkes' huge airship overhead. Would you destroy your daughter's home as well? It is not her home. Then we find ourselves at an impasse yet again. The sense of history between these two feeds the tension of this macho standoff, but fortunately sabres are rattled but not drawn. In this time, Wes and Linnea have snuck off onto the slopes with their friends the polar bears, and are making their way to the suspected location of the Shrouded City, which we now know as Arcturus. It is around this time that the ghost cats return and attack Wes, Linnea and the assembled polar bears, but this time in greater numbers. There is a short fight and the ghost cats begin to get the upper hand. During the struggle, Wes spots his father's old biplane under the snow and is able to reach and fire a flare into the air, which startles the cats long enough for an escape. Whilst fleeing their feline pursuers, they stumble on the wreckage of Galen's airship, the Indomitable, the one we saw getting attacked at the very beginning of the book. Upon searching inside, Wes is able to establish that there were no bodies, but that several first aid kits and other key supplies were missing, before also discovering their father's final journal. Galen's final journal reveals that sadly none of the crew survived, but that Galen had removed all their bodies and buried them in a crevasse nearby, which sounds pretty noble until you consider that they all died because Galen's life was valued higher than theirs, which is, not an amazing reason ultimately. Within the pages of the journal, Wes also discovers an unsent letter Galen had written to Elizabeth, which incidentally is the first time you hear poor Liz's name in the whole book. In this letter, Galen regrets being a shitty husband and dad, and it genuinely feels like Galen may have had something of a breakthrough in terms of understanding their own mind. This is my last entry. The best of me is so miserably poor, dear Elizabeth. I realise now the drive to find the city became my answer for finding what most men search for more than anything else. A way to beat the fear of inadequacy. To become. Perhaps my love for you will redeem the rest of me. Near the airship wreckage, the bears find a small tunnel leading under the nearby mountain, and inside Wes finds a huge glass-walled cavern. It would appear they had actually found Arcturus. What looked like a snow-covered mountain was actually the city they had sought all along. Wes descends down a massive mechanical shaft in this huge building, getting about 15 stories down before encountering a survivor. It was Galen. At last Wes finds their father. I doubled him with a punch to the stomach. That's for never being there. Yeah, this is how unhealthily masculine relationships play out, I guess. They do eventually settle down after some posturing and start to just show genuine affection, which is a brief but nice moment where they let their guards down and talk about how they really feel about each other. They both return to the surface and begin examining the artifact and trying to decipher its purpose in relation to Arcturus, since it would appear related to some of the machinery they found within the city. It's Linnea that points out that the markings on the surface resembled the Ursa Major constellation, the Bear. And at this point, the pieces come together for Galen, and they exclaim, "It's an engine! The whole place is an engine!" They reason that the city of Arcturus was a portal to the star of the same name, and that it must have been built by someone not human. Yep, that's right, we are suddenly going extraterrestrial. Though no one actually says that, of course. In fact, they don't really dwell on this mystery too much at all. Galen immediately turns their mind to revenge, revealing that it was Brayburn Wilkes that attacked their airship at the beginning of the book, killing all of the crew and causing this whole rescue endeavour. And of course, right on cue, they all hear an airship landing at the surface. It's the Applebad man himself, Brayburn Wilkes, along with hired gun Solon Kai and a big old squad of goons. Galen ushers Wes and Linnea to run before turning to face Wilkes alone. There's a big old chase scene as planes and snowmobiles chase Wes and Linnea on their polar bears, and it all goes a bit Indiana Jones again. Solon Kai gives chase on a woolly rhino, and Linnea turns her polar bear and charges them, kicks their ass a bit, and then reveals that Solon Kai is their father, before seemingly shaming them into quiet acquiescence. Linnea probably would have made a better protagonist in a lot of ways. They are certainly more competent at any rate. But our main hero is Wes, and they naturally manage to make an already tense and awkward situation worse by injecting it with their signature cringe. You mean I'm dating a princess? Fuck's sake, Wes, not now, mate. Back with Galen, Wilkes reveals to them that Elizabeth is being held hostage and that they've had to persuade her to cooperate, which feels very much like they are suggesting she was tortured. So Elizabeth continues to have just the worst time thanks to the men in her life. Whilst Wilkes is gloating and lording it over Galen a bit, Wes returns to save their father with an awesome image and one of the cringiest lines in the whole book. I sent someone to talk to Elizabeth about the scrambled coordinates. She wouldn't talk to just anyone, Wilkes. You're right, she didn't. She just needed a little persuasion. Wait for it. Said the man about to die. I like to think Manchess has deliberately written Wes to be the king of cringe, and that they didn't write this line to be cool. But either way, this young lad is just too much. Wilkes draws a revolver and demands that Wes hands over the artifact, to which Wes responds by throwing it into a cauldron some way down the shaft behind them. As Wilkes goes to shoot Wes for, well, being Wes, Grim, the oldest and largest of the bears, charges Wilkes and flings them into the near bottomless shaft, Emperor Palpatine style. After that, it's largely a big back-patting with everyone celebrating and rejoicing, except for Grim, who took a bullet for their troubles. But don't worry, the bear survives. Wilkes' second in command turns out to be the original turncoat, Edwards. You know, from Galen's airship at the start? Edwards basically does a Lando and pretends they were a good guy all along, ensuring that Wilkes' armed guards are no longer a threat and offering to take Galen back to the city to poor Elizabeth. There doesn't really seem to be much rhyme or reason to any of this, or any resentment of Edwards for causing an awful lot of these problems, which is a choice. Galen and Wes have a talk, and it seems initially that Galen now realises how poorly they have treated their wife, and they say they want to make amends, but then that is all quickly dispelled when revealed that actually Galen intends to exact revenge on Sam Barstow. Character development is for other characters, I guess. Wes and Linnea decide to head back to the monastery, but plan to return to Arcturus to unravel the mysteries of the portal and reclaim the artifact, but not before Wes drops some final cringe on us. Looks like good guys do finish first, Wilkes, right after the jerks give up.
That took everything for me not to shout out fuck.
So there you have it. The bad guys lose, the good guys win. We get a headache from cringing at Wes, and no one really mentions the fact that they effectively found a bloody Stargate in the mountains. I suppose all that is left to talk about is what any of this might have meant and what thematic element struck me as I read through it. So let's do it. We've talked about the world, the characters and the basics of the plot, but now is the bit where I take you through how the story spoke to me and the main themes that I personally took away from the book. And I want to reiterate that these are not the official or author-sanctioned themes. These are just what my brain pulled from the books, so it's okay if your experience differs from mine, and by all means let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Gender, family and above the timberline. I would make a joke about the Sigma males turning off the video now, but let's be real, I have not mentioned grind sets or how unfair it is that women have agency, and I haven't tried to sell you any hooky supplements, so they are probably long gone anyway. First off, Above the Timberline has a consistent theme about fathers failing their children. Whether it be the literal paternal relationships of Galen with Wes, or Solon Kai with Linnea, or the wider paternalistic relationships of Galen and their crew, Solon Kai and their tribesmen, or the sheer number of older male characters that are unreliable, treacherous, or selfish. Characters like Sam Barstow, Solon Kai, Braven Wilkes and even Tao to some degree all encounter a precocious 17-year-old boy in a situation of intense vulnerability and see their interactions with him as an opportunity to enrich or strengthen themselves. Starting with Galen and Wesley Singleton's relationship, Galen is preoccupied with gaining prestige, as they themselves describe it in their letter to their abandoned wife. I realise now the drive to find the city became my answer for finding what most men search for more than anything else, a way to beat the fear of inadequacy, to become. This rare moment of honesty highlights how Galen's drive was always a selfish one, coated in delusions about serving the family by proving themselves adequate, whatever that means. It reflects an aspect of toxic masculinity that is quite well understood by this point, that the inability of men to express themselves emotionally to their peers means that they rely almost exclusively on their spouse to provide their emotional support, even if they themselves do not replicate that same support. What do I mean by that? Well, As an example, there was a study reported in Time magazine by Haley Weiss where 1 million Danish citizens aged 65 or older were studied to see what effect being widowed had on the people being studied. Overall, the researchers found that in the year after losing a spouse, men were 70% more likely to die than similarly aged men who did not lose a spouse, whilst women were 27% more likely to die compared to women who did not become widowed. Dassel and Carr suggest that among men of all ages, increased mortality risk could be tied to the detrimental effects of loneliness in older age, one of the biggest risk factors for early death. A lot of these older men grew up during a time when men had certain ideas about what was appropriate and not to be masculine, says Carr. Men tend to rely very heavily on their spouses in heterosexual couples for their social needs to be met. Women traditionally tend to fare better due to a wider emotional support network and to being more socially open with peers. This puts a lot of strain on characters like Elizabeth, who are already doing all of the reproductive and domestic labour, raising Wesley more or less alone and maintaining the home in Galen's many prolonged absences. The glimpses that we get of Wes's relationship with their father suggest one of paternal pressure and aloofness, of framing their relationship by Wes's competence at exploration and outdoorsmanship. And yes, that is a word, I checked. We gather through Wes's journals that once it became clear that Wes was not as naturally inclined or driven towards the same endeavours as their father, Galen somewhat withdrew from the relationship and began spending more time pursuing the legends of the shrouded city of Arcturus, and even less with their family. Galen's drive to achieve prestige and recognition from their peers at the Polaris Geographic Society also highlights the perceived masculine need to compete and enrich their reputation, since in Galen's case at least, it was not just about the accumulation of wealth, as indicated by their willingness to let Sam Barstow keep the shared takings of a previous expedition without complaint or pursuit. If we switch to Sol and Kai, we experience a similar vibe when examining what we know of their relationships with the women in their life. Sol and Kai's former wife Dessa, who is presumably Linnea's mother, is revealed to have left Sol and Kai on a number of occasions, and eventually ended up forming a relationship with the monastery leader Tao. When in a tense face-off, as covered earlier in the video, Sol and Kai remarks that it was Tao's fault that Dessa hasn't returned as they have previously, which shows a lack of belief in a woman's agency, that the only thing that stopped them returning to Sol and Kai is the actions or intent of another man, rather than as a final choice taken by Dessa. And the lack of agency of women in Sol and Kai's life is reinforced by what we learn of Linnea's situation too. Linnea has been living in the village next to Shadow Moon Monastery after being sent to marry Xuan, Tao's right-hand man, in an attempt to create an allegiance via marriage, like some kind of feudal lord, which I guess Sol and Kai kind of is. Linnea is used as a pawn in a power game, an asset to be leveraged in order to consolidate Sol and Kai's position as the predominant power in the Waste, all of which is a selfish pursuit of power and dominance. Once Sol and Kai learns that Tao will not enforce the marriage without Linnea's consent, and that Linnea has not yet agreed to marry Xuan, they effectively imprison their daughter in the Tuklan camp until Linnea escapes with Wesley. Galen with Wes and Sol and Kai with Linnea are two explicit paternal relationships we encounter, and both include a father figure preoccupied with power, whether it be the social capital of Galen or the territorial dominance of Sol and Kai, and both sublimate their children to being either an irrelevance or an asset to be used and exploited. Tao, acting as a step-parent, certainly shows some more wholesome behaviours with Linnea, being patient, respectful of marital consent and protective of their freedom, but less so with Wesley, whom he condemns to a trial by sword and bear. A trial that I think Tao expected them to fail. Perhaps we can argue that Tao's paternal guardianship of the monastery is the predominant responsibility in this situation, but the fact remains that however annoying and cringe Wesley is, and he is, no matter how much influence they can wield as the rich heir of an imperial explorer, they still remain a 17-year-old child, alone, out of their depth and extremely vulnerable. All of the other men Wes encounters fail to act paternally. Barstow, Wilkes and Sol and Kai all see Wes as an exploitable and vulnerable child, and in fact the only male character that shows Wes any form of paternal affection is probably Struts, who is both horrified at the prospect of seeing such a young person enter the waste alone and determined to share as much experience and advice as possible in their short time together. Other than Struts, it is the female characters of Above the Timberline that show generally positive behaviours, whether it is with the endlessly patient Elizabeth, the tenacious determination and open-mindedness of Linnea, or the protective benevolence of the Bear Pack, who we must remember are all female. Now, the next theme that I wanted to talk about is probably the least surprising one you would expect to hear from me if you've seen any of my videos before. Yes, folks, it's time. Capitalism, class, and above the timberline. Steampunk feels intrinsically linked to capitalism, doesn't it? The Victorian setting reeks of colonialism, of empire, and the irrepressible progress of industry. We envision drawing rooms thick with cigar smoke, wealthy white men with preposterous waxed mustaches swilling brandy sat in high-backed leather armchairs talking about expeditions, trade, and all the trappings of power. It is with little surprise then that steampunk tends to come packaged with the same failings as Victorian England, and Above the Timberline is no different. Whether it is Galen, Wilkes, or the wider Polaris Geographic Society, they all lust for new territories, new markets, and the power that comes from social capital. This inherent need for growth and an ever-increasing demand for money, power, and prestige drives conflict, both between those vying for a place at the top of the pyramid and those they would step on to get there. And it is not just being exploited that those of the lower classes can look forward to, but also the corruption of their values and their absorption into capitalism's wake. The Polaris Geographic Society acts as our lightning rod, the concentrated tip of capitalism, and its flanking horsemen of imperialism and colonialism, all beneficiaries of the layers of exploitation below them. We see this with the crew of Galen's airship, who heroically throw their bodies in front of gunfire so that their wealthy explorer, Galen Singleton, can escape. We see this in the huge museum that appears to make up the entrance to the PGS, complete with giant animals and what looks like ancient Egyptian artefacts, which leaves us in no doubt that we are meant to associate this with institutions like the British Museum. The British Museum, of course, being the world's largest collection of stolen goods. The supplication of the Tuklan into the service of the PGS is also an example of capitalism's creep into the waste, moving out from the cities in long tendrils and infecting those that had thus far avoided such ideological contamination. When Galen first meets Solon Kai, it would appear that the tribal leader is generous with their time and their expertise. They're enthusiastic about being part of Galen's adventure and sharing knowledge accrued from a hard life on the snow and ice. They are stern, but sharing appears to be a part of the way they live their life, and exploiting the needs of others to leverage your own benefit seemingly doesn't even occur to them, as Galen themselves remarks. Tribal Chief Solon Kai has promised to show me the barrier wall and the path they've used to cross for years. Oddly, he wants no payment. This is contrasted neatly with how Galen identifies that many of the Tuklan are suffering from a mild form of scurvy and uses the promise of fruits and vegetables as a way to gain the Tuklan's trust. In Galen's defence, they did show a lot more respect for the knowledge and ways of the Tuklan than the rest of the PGS, but we can't escape the transactional nature of every situation they approach. Those fools back in Empress City neglect the real value of maintaining camaraderie with native people. When we meet the Tuklan again just a few years later, they are buying guns, suppressing and consolidating the other tribes, and arranging political marriages to cement their power. Far from being happy to share with Wes, Solon Kai warns, all things are our property in the white. The law of capitalism is its ability to enrich a minority very quickly, and Solon Kai was on the hook before long, seizing the opportunity to gain access to weaponry and capital in exchange for the exploitation of their tribespeople. The interesting question then becomes, have the Tuklan and the assembled nomadic tribespeople benefited from this relationship with capitalism? Are their chances of survival higher now? Their average lifespan longer? Has their standard of life improved? There is no surefire way of answering those questions other than to observe the following. They still live in the same environment and have the same lifestyle, albeit with more powerful weapons and heavily leveraged access to fruit and vegetables. They used to live in relative peace, but are now part of an empire that is held together by threat of violence as opposed to any mutual need. Their lifestyle used to consist of what was necessary to survive, but is now dominated by their servitude to Braben Wilkes, putting them into dangerous situations on the behalf of the person with capital. I would say that even Sol Kai, who would be the recipient of most of the trappings that come from being of an elevated class in a capitalist system, has an arguably worse life now that they are a gun for hire, and must also be watchful for challenges, usurpers and mutiny, where they once just watched over the safety and welfare of their people. The lust for money and the pursuit of profit can distort a person's ambitions such that they lose all sense of priority, and this is seen by the wider state of the city-states and the PGS. So much of their energy is spent hunting for technology and trying to exploit the endeavours of the old world because it is profitable. Each find can be sold or reverse engineered and used relatively quickly. However, we don't hear or see any signs of the same energies being poured into improving the lives of ordinary people in their society, or into asking more questions of what led the world to this ice age. Galen at one point mentions conversing with an archaeologist who explains their findings regarding the global warming of our time, and there is some speculation as to what may have happened, but few seem to be asking the question of what part humanity had to play in this disaster. Galen's journal says, "Samples generally show global temps increased. Speculation: ozone weakened enough to allow CO2 dissipation into space, pushed the planet into extreme ice age. Pole shift occurred in the late 21st. Earth's mantle spun faster than its crust, causing plates to break loose and float above magma. Massive tectonic shift, entire crust broken in whole sections along fault lines. Northern tectonic plates let go first, thrown outward towards equator. Northern continents collided with other continents flowing from the southern hemisphere. Cities split apart, driven into each other, pulverized each other. Speculation: some areas undisturbed by the pressure, possibly preserved beneath the ice. But to what depth? How many mountain ranges, newly created, hide city sections? The profit motive, whilst arguably effective in promoting innovation, will promote profitable behaviour above innovative or benevolent endeavours, and the promise of treasures under the ice blinds many to the question of whether they should be uncovering the trinkets and tech of a fallen world. There is even a taste of neoliberalism in there. When you consider that most of what is valued in this snowy world was built, manufactured or designed hundreds of years before, and that society appears to have reclaimed steam tech, but then just stopped progressing. Again, it is more profitable in the short term to simply live off of the hard work of the distant past. Building something new would mean delaying a return. And even if this return was longer lasting and more sustainable, and ultimately a more fruitful endeavour, this is the inherent weakness of neoliberalism: a short-term focus, a reliance on pleasing owners over customers, and a lack of long-term foresight. As I am here saying this to you, my loyal viewers, I reflect on the fact that the infrastructure in my country is largely Victorian or at best mid-20th century, with a good example being our water network, which is permanently on the verge of collapse due to the neglect caused by privatisation. A willful neglect that prioritised profit for shareholders over the needs of their customers and led to them pumping out more poisonous shite than Wes Streeting when he sees a happy nurse. In fact, I did a video on Thames Water a couple of years ago on this very subject if you're interested, and believe me, it has gotten a lot worse since then. Similar stories can be told for all privatised services, be they power, mail, public transport, housing. Things we are told can no longer be publicly owned as we no longer have the expertise. It turns out that losing generations of skills and knowledge doesn't need an ice age, just some neoliberalism. Anyway, that's enough about nasty old capitalism, gender bias and neoliberalism. The logs burn low, the firewood is mostly ash and cinders, and dawn threatens to start another day. It is probably about time we started to wrap up our time together, don't you think? Gregory Manchess's Above the Timberline is a fine piece of art and offers us a glimpse at a post-apocalyptic setting full of steampunk paraphernalia, snow and magic. Not literal magic of course, but the magic of fantastical machines, of whimsical world building and of old-fashioned adventure. It gives us polar bear friends, airship battles, snow leopard attacks, sudden and inevitable betrayals, teen romance, big gizmos, and lest we forget, just a hint of aliens. But it also leaves us with a lot of unanswered questions. What does the artifact do? Who built the Stargate engine and where are they now? What will the rest of the PGS do when they find out about Arcturus City's existence? Will Sol and Kai claim Arcturus as part of their dominion over the waste? Where does all this leave their plans? Will Tau allow others to visit and exploit a seemingly mystical site, and what does it mean for their beliefs that so much of their folklore may be based in mortal endeavours? Does Galen catch up to Barstow, and what form does their revenge take? We do get some closure between Galen and Wes. We do see Wes and Linnea become close and adventure together, and we do get to see the big baddie get their comeuppance. However, the tensions and conflicts that existed between the different cultures of Above the Timberline at the start of the story still exist by the end, and there feels a lot of scope for exploring the wider world and the mysteries buried beneath its icy embrace. I have my issues with some aspects of the book, as I've already covered, particularly with the way that its women are written, but there is still an undeniable charm and warmth to much of Manchess's Pulp Fiction writing style, focusing on simple stories of courage, family, and the rejection of greed for its own sake. Certainly, I would recommend it, particularly for younger readers looking to spread their wings into graphic novels, and I would be interested to hear the thoughts of anyone who has read it themselves. Anyway, the sun rises, and it is time to return to the snowy embrace of the tundra. Thank you all for watching and joining me on this exploration of Above the Timberline. Please give the video a like if you've enjoyed it and subscribe for more of this kind of content. Thanks also go out to Mrs. Inside Left for their help with script and filming, to Nico for the use of the microphone, Advent Song and Robert Gordon for providing the excellent backing music, and of course the We Create Together crew for their support, advice and expertise. I hope to see you again real soon. Goodbye for now.